live. I want to genuinely
You're sort of fixated
live
on this.
respond to this, okay? Because the topic piqued my attention, but it's not just the topic, it's the people discussing the topic who piqued my attention as well. So the video is called "You Can't Become English: Heated on-air race clash between Catherine Singh." So this is an Asian woman. I need you to bear that in mind. That might become relevant, okay? And Connor Tomlinson, okay? What is it with these sons, these Insons, Robinson, Tomlinsons? He's clearly going to be our antagonist in this discussion. They might both end up being our antagonists, but I like people who speak from their chest because A, we can have a proper discussion with them, and B, they're easy to refute if you need to refute them. But anyway, so this discussion is between this lady, Catherine Singh, and Connor Tomlinson. So this is going to be a live react. Let's check it out.
Whole ethnicity point. If you were to adopt a child, you and your wife were to adopt a baby from Nigeria, let's say, and you were to bring up the baby in your household and send your child to a school that was patriotic, there would be a love for England in your household. Are you telling me that child would not be brought up as a British child? Is that what you're?
Now, just to be clear here, this is why this piqued my attention. Okay, notice how this is an Indian woman, debating a white man, and I know that this is just kind of like the pre-run where they put in the chops of good footage to grab everyone's attention. But notice in her little scenario that she drew up, she's made the child Nigerian. Now, I had 3 subscribers said, why Nigeria, why not Asian? Exactly. exactly the same thing I thought. That's why I was like, I'm going to live respond to this because that is such an Asian thing to do. Asians are so desperate to make out like the race debate is something that needs to be argued between white and black people. And they consider themselves, for some reason, some weird reason, as not a part of the race problem or the immigration problem. The immigration problem doesn't include them. So you have to understand that kind of the way she's framed that question is symptomatic of senior Asian politicians right now who are talking exactly like that. Okay, we've got a woman called Suella Braverman. Before that, there was a woman called Preeti Patel. These women, these Asian women, are obsessed with creating and not even fabricating, but actually amplifying and exaggerating this racial divide between whites and blacks. When in reality, if you come to the UK, black people aren't really the #1 concern when they talk about immigration. They really normally are talking about different groups from different parts of Asia when it comes to immigration, when it comes to people taking jobs and stuff, but they want to distract the argument and they're desperate to make it about black people. That's why she's like, oh, if you had a child and you're from Nigeria, why don't you say from Bangladesh? Why couldn't the child be from Mumbai? If you had a child and you're from Mumbai, why didn't you say that? Why did it have to be Nigerian? But Miss Sal, do you think that he's talking to you like a peer right now? Do you think you typical Asian? But anyway, let's carry on and have a watch.
You're saying
they would possess a British passport.
So hang on,
using your school as no,
that child.
And to be clear, Sal, we don't need you advocating for us. And actually, let me be very clear. I don't want, as a black person, Asians advocating for us because you don't do a very good job. And actually, the #1 perpetrators of anti-black racism in the UK are the Asian community by a long shot, by a country mile. You are far more likely to be hired by a white person in the UK than an Asian person. It's not even close. I promise you that it's not even close. If you're black and you go into an interview, you can be the most qualified person in the world. If the person interviewing you is Asian, I almost guarantee you're not going to get that job. So Miss Sal here acting like she needs to advocate. We don't want you advocating for us, Sal. Advocate for your community. Discuss your community with him, not ours, please.
Because that child is black, would not be just...
No, it's because that child is Nigerian. It's not because they're black.
But it's your child. You've brought up that child.
Yes, but that doesn't mean they suddenly become English. You cannot become English, no more than a man who puts on a dress can become a woman.
I don't believe skin color or ethnicity carries culture. I think culture is created in the environment in which you are brought up in.
And our two guests in the studio, Britain's strictest headmistress from the famous Michaela School, Catherine Birbalsingh, and host of Tomlinson Talks on YouTube and Substack, Connor Tomlinson.
Immigration is the biggest deception, fugazi, that they put out on the general public. You know, everyone in the general public has been fed this stupid narrative that immigration is the result of imperialism and countries in the West paying their debt to society. That's the view that they put on. Oh, everyone thinks that immigration, all immigrants are refugees, first of all, which first of all is false. Okay, majority of immigrants aren't refugees. Okay, a majority of immigrants are there by choice, but without any kind of aren't there under any duress. Secondly, even refugees and lower level unskilled immigrants are all a part of a growing capitalist economy. In growing capitalist economies, the need for a steady stream of immigrants into your population is vital to holding the minimum wage down and to making workforces employable and for supporting small businesses. It is literally vital. It is the lifeblood. Otherwise, what happens is you get massive levels of inflation when it comes to wages and a rise in minimum wage as your general population becomes more and more skilled as time goes on. Without that level of immigrants, you don't have those low level jobs because no one's there to take them. So these are the lies they don't tell you. But anyway, that's the whole another discussion. Let's get on with this.
Seed. British historian Robert Toms seems to think so, as at a conference on how to save England last year, he said that the solution to immigration, integration and sectarian voting was to, quote, clone Catherine Birbalsingh, because if you've been to her Michaela School and have seen little girls with headscarves on reciting Kipling and singing the national anthem, you think that becoming English is possible if you want to do it.
That's so pathetic as well, respectfully. That is so pathetic, acting like this woman who's assimilating migrants as though they don't get that in every school, as if there's this resistance for Muslim kids, you know, or African kids to embrace British culture. Any immigrant from any part of the world wants their kids to speak good English and become good British citizens because they know that down the line it is financially beneficial for that to be the case. As someone who has taught across the UK, but not only that, has experienced schooling in the UK and in London, the most multicultural place in the UK and possibly in the world, to be totally honest with you, there's never been this issue of immigrant kids not wanting to embrace British culture. This is a falseness, it's a falsehood to say it's completely made up. It's an entire fabrication. It's not an issue. This is the things that they want people arguing about, these non-existent situations where, you know, you have to go to a special school to make the kids want to really be English. Like, oh, for flip's sake, like this is the stupidity that you're surrounded with and the lies that you're surrounded with when you live in the UK. None of this is real. None of this is real.
And if you're encouraged to do it, and if you're required to do it,
and respectfully, only idiots like this guy and his guest, they're the only ones who believe in this crap. Oh, well, you know, without good schooling, what will happen is the kids will come here and then they'll just join a terrorist organization. Like, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, for God's sake, man.
But one person who disagrees with that philosophy is Connor Tomlinson, who wrote an article after the conference insisting that you can't make...
Connor doesn't look too bright, does he? Let's be honest.
...make someone British, and you can't learn an identity. He says this integration myth must end. Catherine then began to weigh in on the conversation on X, leading to this invitation for her and Connor to participate in the discussion moderated by Gove on the issue of multiculturalism and integration. So, Connor, I'll start with you. Why don't you think integration can succeed, and why do you take umbrage with the almost
Verbal Singh's really trying to rock the afro, isn't she? She's really trying to lean into this I can speak for black people. Let's see. She's got some winning back to do now, because I've seen that kind of pre-roll and I'm already irritated. I already don't like her. So I hope that she imprints positively on me as this goes on.
universally revered work of Catherine at the Michaela School?
Thank you very much for hosting us both, Dan. I must say I enjoy it.
Is it like deja vu?
And that's such a typical prospectus image that you'll get on any London school. Yeah. Oh, look at me surrounded by brown and black children. Hooty hooty.
Again, significantly more sound than the Unheard Studios. So I wanted to say, first of all, and I said this in the previous discussion we had, that
yes, but we didn't get to hear that, so you're going to have to repeat yourself.
I do not take any umbrage with the exam results and the like that Catherine has been able to achieve, especially considering the disastrous education system that is only getting worse on the Bridget Phillipson. So the debate itself is, or discussion or disagreement, is not necessarily about a philosophy of the education system. My contentions were threefold, and I think it's taken on renewed importance since we had our first discussion, because not only, as Kemi Badenoch said at ARC, that Catherine's work is her model for the muscular liberalism she would like to see become the driving philosophy of her Conservative Party, but because Suella Braverman, who
Suella Braverman, who I mentioned earlier, is the Asian, I think she's a Home Secretary. I think she might be shadow now. But anyway, she's a witch, an absolute witch. Absolute witch. Like the parliament's full of these basically Nazi-like Asian women. Really, really vilely anti-black. So, you know, there you go. Shout out Dregger for the $2 for the algorithm. I appreciate the donation.
She mentioned in her speech as Reform's new education spokesperson, said the Michaela School is her model for what she would like to see throughout education. And so it's pertinent, per that quote that you read out at the start, that political parties across Britain are looking to the Michaela School as a model, not just for education, but hopefully for their education, assimilation and cultural cohesion strategy. And so my concern...
And just to pipe in really quickly, on the UK education system, it is failing, to be clear. He didn't qualify as to how he's judged failing, but I'll qualify how I judge failing. One of the biggest problems we have in the UK education system is that black children enter primary school, and it's still the case, at the top of the class. They enter primary school with a higher reading level, higher maths attainment, than quite a bit higher than the average, and at the top. Okay, so black children enter primary school at the top of the class. By the time they conclude primary school, they're on average at the bottom of the class. Now, in the UK, everyone's aware of this statistic, and it's presented as not a problem or a failure of the education system, but instead it's presented as a problem with the black community. Does that ring true, by the way, for any black Americans here? Okay, the same tactics being used here. So black parents, we're sending our kids to school in the form or in the manner that we should be sending them to school, top of the class, okay? And the school is systematically failing them to such a high degree that by the time they leave primary school, they're at the bottom of the class and their confidence is through the floor. Now, I can tell you right now, and I'll tell you unequivocally, without any shadow of a doubt, that happens because a lot of teachers are racist, particularly Asian ones, by the way. If you on my live stream right now, if you're playing this back and your child has an Asian teacher, you better be on top of that, because Asians are right at the top when it comes to anti-black racism. I've had to move my daughter's school twice because of the Asian teachers who wouldn't acknowledge their racism and wouldn't change their way and would try their best to break my child's confidence, and I wouldn't allow it. I absolutely wouldn't allow it. So I moved them to a private school, and then I had to move them from a private school to a grammar school because of Asian racism, by the way. Strangely enough, I never had this problem with white teachers. Every time they had white teachers, they flourished. But my point being is that you're not only going to get this from Asian teachers, you get it from white teachers, but the bottom line is the entire education system is geared up to make black children fail. And yet there's been no effort, no inquest, no investment to see where they're failing black kids. It's just put on the black community. So like, what the heck? You're loco parentis. We're sending our kids to you. You've got one job to do, and that is, if they're at the top of the class, and maintain that until they leave primary school. They should be leaving the top of the class. They shouldn't be cascading to the bottom. This is absolutely a failure in the system. So yes, I do think the UK education system's a pile of crap, but as a black parent, let me tell you right now, you do not have the luxury to send your kids to school and then to just go to your job and to not be an active, involved parent. I am active and involved. I have been with all of my kids, and as a result, they've done well. But if I wasn't, they wouldn't have. I'm quite certain of that. So I'm just putting that warning out there to you guys.
Ones were threefold. First, that the version of British identity that is put forward as being practiced desirably at Catherine's school is indistinguishable from liberal pluralism, which allows other identities and other faiths to proliferate underneath it like an umbrella. The second thing I said was, I am not confident it's going to work. For the precise reason, as Robert Toome said, if girls are reading Kipling and singing God Save the King, but they're still doing it in Muslim garb, that means that they have inherited a comprehensive worldview, Islam, from their parents, but you can substitute it in with plenty of other religions as well. And they may well be participating in the culture that I have inherited as an Englishman, but we don't know in which way they're going to do it. And we don't know if that is going to have a stronger hold on the way they see the world than their inherited culture, their inherited faith, their inherited family dynamics. And the final concern I had was,
what a stupid argument, respectfully. This guy is really like not very bright. Okay, so the argument he's just made there is that someone can go through a schooling system and they can, you know, participate in all of the kind of outward displays of being fully ingrained into the culture. But if they do it wearing a hijab, then it shows that they have essentially got divided interests, because this religion means that they could be more committed to that religion than they are to the nation. Well, then and he said, oh, well, a lot of other religions, it could be the case as well. But notice how he doesn't specifically mention Christianity. Now, Christianity doesn't have an outward garb, okay? It doesn't have an outward garb. It just, you're a Christian. So is it the presence of the clothing that is your issue? How about Hindus? They don't really have an outward garb. They might put a dot on their forehead or maybe some Mendi patterns on their hand. But by and large, you wouldn't even know that someone is a Hindu unless they tell you. Same with a Sikh, unless they've grown their hair, for instance. Yeah. So a lot of these things you won't even know people are practicing. And yet he's using that to say that, well, it shows that they have, you know, parted interests. So what are you trying to ban? Are you trying to say that someone can't practice a religion and be patriotic and be someone who fully loves their nation? Do you see how stupid this argument is? This is not a guy who, I don't think he's even put any thought into it. But anyway, let me see what the response is.
If it does work, then it generates a brand new governing class with an excellent education as provided by Catherine. That means that you then have a new generation of politicians of immigrant heritage who will then govern over an increasingly fractured society where we are approaching a state of being a minority. And we've already had that in Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel and Kemi Badenoch. And all of these people, Rishi Sunak included, has been upheld as an immigrant success story. Yet, what did he do when he was in government? He opened the doors to India. And so it shows that there are still these ethnic and cultural and religious loyalties that persist despite a good education, despite going through all of Britain's institutions and assimilating.
So what about when the doors were open to the EU? Did you have an issue with that? Because that was done when you probably had about 2 or 3 black faces in the whole of the Houses of Parliament. Okay, when we joined the EU, and that opened floodgates of Polish immigration was insane. And if people knew the deal that the UK had with Poland, they'd understand why so many Polish immigrants came here, because Polish immigrants didn't pay tax. They did pay tax, but the tax they could claim back upon leaving to go back to Poland. They had made a deal with the Polish government that a lot of people weren't aware of. So the Polish came here in droves, and as a result, they are massive, you know, business, and they have massive business and land ownership all across London as a result of the very favorable deal that they were given, which has essentially allowed them to build themselves up in class. And now most Polish are pretty much middle class. They entered as working class, and they are managed in a single generation to build themselves up to a middle class population because of the favorable tax deal. Now, that tax deal was done with an all-white parliament, okay, with a white foreign secretary and a white home secretary. So him making this argument, okay, I don't like Priti Patel, I don't like Suella Braverman, I don't like, you know, Kemi Badenoch, and I certainly don't like Rishi Sunak. I don't like any of them, okay? They're all evil, they're all wicked, and they're all useless. But the point being, his entire racial argument makes no sense, okay? All of these governments are just doing what they've already done. It's nothing to do with race. And obviously, when come to the UK as well, the biggest problem we have in the UK is European immigration, okay? If you want to look at the rates of crimes that are committed, they're done by the EU migrants. There was a massive problem with Eastern European migrants and RAPE in the UK, particularly in London. It was through the roof. They were literally just coming here and just literally, it was never ever given any attention. It was never reported on, and it was just literally overlooked because these people doing it were white migrants, white immigrants committing crimes they never want to shine a light on. In fact, just go back a few years, about 3 or 4 years, there was a massive trend of EU migrants, mainly from Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania, basically jacking people's cars up in front of their houses, sometimes in the driveway, and then with a grinder cutting out their catalytic converter and just driving away with it. And before you say that sounds far-fetched, it happened to my next door neighbor. It happened to my next door neighbor, and they're in their 60s. Her husband, she came out and she was like, "What are you doing?" They chased her into a house with a crowbar. Her husband came out and they tried to attack him. She called the police. Here's a nice little statistic for you guys. The police haven't come to this day. So that crime wasn't even reported because she called the police and the police never came. And they had a Range Rover. It was a Range Rover. They jacked the Range Rover up. They took the catalytic converter out, and they just had to pay for it. It's never been filed as a crime because the police didn't even bother showing up. Now, bear in mind, one of the reasons the police didn't show up is because when she called up, she said, "Oh, there's a group of Eastern Europeans." If she had said IC3s, if she had said, "Oh, there's a group of black boys and they look like they're robbing someone," I guarantee you 6 police cars would have turned up. But because it was some Eastern Europeans taking the catalytic converter out of a car and they chased into her, "Oh, did they hit you?" "No, they didn't hit me." "Okay, we'll just stay in your house. It's much safer there." That's all the police managed to say to her. Nothing, not even a crime report. So it doesn't even get filed as a statistic. This is, yeah, anyway.
Ultimately, I'm quite pessimistic.
Catherine, why is he wrong?
Okay, well, I've written down here just what my original problem with Connor was. But I've just quoted you here from what you wrote about us. Which
I'm surprised it could fit on one sheet of A4, to be fair.
Yes,
people
it's true.
normally have more problems.
Well, no. Well, you said quite a lot in the 2 videos that you made on us, and then also in your Substack. You said what Birbalsingh and the Michaela School model represent is a replacement of Britain's traditional high trust, homogenous, self-governing, spontaneous order with an authoritarian headmistress state to make new tribal minorities and the besieged host majority play nice. So that, I suppose, sums up sort of what you just said?
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't think you really know schools. I think that why...
That's a fact. He doesn't know anything about education, just to be clear. Doesn't know a thing.
While you sort of say, yes, it's great that you've got these GCSE results.
And just to also jump on what Smelly said there, yeah, in the UK, you have to understand the demographics, yeah? The UK white population is like, it's humongous. I think white people make up about 90% of the population. 89 to 90% of the population in the UK are white. Most of the immigrants are concentrated in the major cities, London, Birmingham, Liverpool. So we have a few major cities and ports where you get a load of the immigrant populations, but most of the rest of England, rural England, is almost entirely white. You'll struggle to see any faces of color, so to speak. The black population, I think we make up about 3% of the UK population. Yeah, so we're a tiny. I think Asians make up about 4%, if I remember correctly. 4 or 5, like, and you know, and then they got a few kind of like European migrants here, there. But yeah, about 80, I think it's about 89% or something like that, the UK white population. So the fear, there's no fear. There should be no fear of replacement to anyone who's got, you know, room temperature IQ. Everyone, it shouldn't even be a talking point. But don't blame them too much. You have to understand how effectively racist the UK media is. The UK media is the most effective dog whistling, underhanded communication falsification machine there is out there. If you think, the good thing about the American one is, you know, channels like Fox, CNN, they wear their liberal and or right-wing politics on their sleeves. It's just like really obvious what they're doing. In the UK, they're so slick and so able. So you got channels like, you know, Sky News, the BBC, you know, they're all the same. Channel 4 News, whatever it is. And they all are very, very good at making the entire population believe they're getting a unbiased perspective. And in reality, they're getting the most racist, most uninformed, biased views that you could think imaginable. I promise you.
Kids are kids. And it doesn't matter what color they are and what religion they are and so on. They need structure and they need order. And
that's a fact as well. He's never taught, and I've taught in, well, every school I've taught in has been multicultural, multi-faith, multiracial in every sense of the word. And kids are just kids. That's the bottom line. There's no running trend I can give you across an ethnic group like you'd find, or they try to purport in, you know, places like America, for instance, who are, you know, dead set on pinning certain characteristics on certain ethnic groups. I can tell you right now, Muslims have as many dumb kids as bright kids, have as many pleasant kids as unpleasant kids. Black people have as many dumb kids as bright kids, as pleasant as unpleasant. White population has as many dumb kids as bright kids, as pleasant as unpleasant. Kids are just kids, okay? They're just kids. And I can tell you also that when they're at high school in age, they're not at the age where many of them have embraced any view enough for it to become their personality. Racism is a very, very taught characteristic. It's a very, very taught characteristic. And the scary thing is there are teachers out there who are, the amount of times I've had to check teachers who are fostering an environment that allows for racism. One of the places I had to check it very heavily when I used to teach in the Middle East. I was at head of moderation out in a school in Qatar, which I've probably mentioned before. And I had to check many, many teachers on their unwillingness to challenge racism, and often encouraging it as well. Because when you take a lot of these teachers outside of the confines of the UK, where there's maybe regulation, when you put them in this unregulated environment, you'd be surprised how colonial they get. It was shocking.
I think you are unwittingly actually just very progressive and very much on the left in the way in which you describe what children need. The idea that children shouldn't require order, and that you've got this idea that there's this spontaneous order that happens. If you put two toddlers in a room with a toy, when there's only one toy, it doesn't matter if the toddlers are black or white, they will hit each other in order to get the toy. And we as adults, you know, our school is very similar in terms of its approach to the parish schools of the 1800s. And this idea that I'm authoritarian rather than being in authority, the distinction is often misunderstood by those on the left, that they think that I'm this authoritarian. And actually what you're saying resembles precisely what the leftists are always accusing me of.
By the way, if head teachers that aren't authoritarian are useless. I'll be totally honest with you. Yeah, the only way a school works is if you have a very clear delineation between the students and the teachers, and the teachers need to be able to lead the school with authority. That's the bottom line. You know, you can't place these kids in a situation of loco parentis, that is the parents acting as, sorry, the teachers acting as parent and guardian, but then remove all of their ability to instill some kind of boundaries and discipline, because many kids can't operate without this. For many kids, school is the only place they go to where they have boundaries. When they go home, no boundaries exist. So calling a head teacher an authoritarian is a compliment.
If you're going to say, well, actually, this is the problem with ethnics being in the country. Well, in Scotland, 1 in 4 of the violent incidents that are reported to the police happen between child and teacher, right? 1 in 4, it's a child attacking their teacher. 1 in 3 kids in Scotland leave primary school not having achieved the basics in maths or English. Across the UK, you need 20% to pass your maths GCSE. 1 in 3 kids don't manage that. You need about 20% to pass your science GCSE. 1 in 3 kids don't manage to reach that. So I'd say there's something bigger.
And I'd also concur. I've taught in a working class white area, and this is one of the things. And once again, it's partly his fault, but it's largely a fault of the UK media, because the UK media likes to paint this picture as though these statistics don't exist. They like to paint the picture as though everything all white is a success and everything multicultural is failing. That's coming from the media. Yes, it's parroted by the politicians, but the media is deliberately putting out this falsehood. I used to teach in a very white working class area. In fact, the school that I taught in, when I arrived there, they hadn't sent a kid to university for 8 years. So for 8 years, not a single child who progressed out of that school had managed to find their way into university. This is a pretty much all white school, given, you know, a little sprinkling of a, you know, ethnic minority here there. Okay. They, in the UK, you have to understand that would shock a lot of the UK population if I told them that, because they believe all these white schools do really well. But she's showing you, like Scotland, for instance, which is almost entirely white, has, you know, 1 in 3, 1/3 of the students can't pass maths or, you know, maths or science at a 20% grade boundary. That's, you know, it shows that those schools are failing. But white failure is ignored so that people can have ridiculous arguments about immigration and have ridiculous views about ethnic minorities like this fella here.
You're going on here, that you're sort of fixated on this whole ethnicity point, when in fact, we need to look at our schools and what our schools are doing. You know, you name all of these politicians who are brown or black, but what about the white politicians? And why are you not questioning why all of these politicians, whatever color they are, react as they do, perhaps, and actually not the ones you've mentioned. I think those ones are very pro-patriotism.
For India.
But no, for this country. Michaela is a reaction not to...
He can't see past color because he's just claimed that Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak, and Kemi Badenoch, because of their color, aren't patriotic. These are 3 of the biggest ethnic coons in the existence of British parliamentary history. In fact, they probably occupy positions 1, 2, 3, and 4 in regards to their level of, you know, anti-ethnic drive. They passionately want to show themselves as being against ethnic minorities and for the white majority with everything that they do. And he's turned around and be like, oh, for India, not for us. That's just, he's just a alt-right racist. He can try and dress it up in this poor impression of a well-spoken Englishman. But the bottom line is, this is just your usual low education, not critically minded, for alt-right Tommy Robinson, you know, BNP member. That's what this guy is. He's not thinking.
Let me give you another stat. In 2008, 75% of teachers said that they have a duty to teach children that we should be ashamed of this country. That's 75% of teachers in 2008. In 2004.
To be clear, the way she's reported that sounds like a total bunch of bullshit. Because why would 78% of teachers say, we need to teach that we should be ashamed? Let's be specific. They're probably talking, the question was probably linked to the British Empire, I'd imagine, because the only thing that any 78% of any population in the UK would ever turn around and say we should be careful about the way that we present this. So the question was probably something in the lines of, in terms of the British Empire, should we be teaching it in a way that shows regret, something along those lines, which makes sense. We shouldn't be celebrating the British Empire. There's nothing to celebrate about the British, about going around the world, unaliving, genociding, colonizing, taking over people's resources, removing their native rulers, removing their native rule of law, destroying their systems, their languages, their architecture, stealing their architecture, all of the above. We shouldn't be celebrating that. It's a shameful part of British history. And yet she's just framed it as, 78% of people, said that we should be ashamed. We should be teaching shame for Britons. Like, this is why I can't stand people like her, sitting here and pretending that they're representing, the ethnic minority in this argument. These people are two sides of the same coin. She's a hypocrite.
80% of children of young people felt that they could be proud of the country. 20 years later, in 2024, that number has been reduced to 40%. So we went from 80% to 40%. That's no wonder when 3/4 of the teaching population is trying to teach the children.
Perhaps the falling in how much people are proud of the nation. Because first of all, stop acting like young people are too stupid to observe what's taking place in the world. You've pulled out 3 separate stats there and then tried to act as though the correlation equals causation in this case. Well, back in this year, 78% of teachers said you should be ashamed of the UK, which is probably not what they said. Like I said, it was probably to do with the British Empire, but that's an aside. And what's happened is since 2008 to present, or she said 2024, children are leaving school and now they're a lot more ashamed or a lot more negative about the UK than they were in 2008. So why don't you ask yourself the question, what's happened between those years to change people's perspectives? Could it be something to do with the numerous wars that have taken place? Could it be something to do with the overt and outright anti-Islamic nature of the media, the press, and the nation's foreign policies? Could it be something to do with the deportation policies? Could it be something to do with the way immigrants are being treated? Could it be something to do with Brexit? You have all of these contributing factors to which most, not just children, but UK adults would say, I'm not proud of this nation. This nation is a shithole, thanks to this shitty parliament and shitty government for the past how many hundreds of, for the past how many decades. Since New Labour, this country has been run to the ground by these demons who all they know how to do is start new wars. All they know how to do is strip any of the things that made this nation great, like the NHS and the free education system, all being turned on their heads. Everyone's suffering in terms of their cost of living. And that's why people hate this nation. But you're going to boil it down to, oh, well, it's the teachers, because they said they weren't teaching us. You should be proud of this nation. You can teach that in your Michaela school as much as you like. But I guarantee you, if you was to ask those kids, even in that school, are they proud of what this nation has done? Many of them would say no, because they're going home and they're seeing, British troops in places they shouldn't be, or they're seeing queues of people waiting to be given food in food banks all across the UK. These are things that never existed a decade ago. Like, engage brain. These people are arguing on a incredibly simplistic, binary and myopic perspective. It's ridiculous.
So what you should be asking yourself is, what is going on in our schools? Why is the country in such a position where it sort of hates itself? Because that's really important when it...
Perhaps the country should hate itself. Did that ever cross your mind? Perhaps it's healthy that the country's population has a problem with this country's foreign policies and this country's domestic policies and this country's treatment of immigrants and this country's outright racism and these countries' royal family who racially dog whistle, and this country who are willing to pull us out of the EU for the sake of corruption and corrupt governments and lies and not fulfilling promises. These are all things. The country's dislike for itself is a reflection of its dislike for the government. That's very, very simple, unless you're wanting to present it as though everything in the nation is a result to how kids are being taught in school, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Comes to cohesion and everyone being able to get on with each other. And I just don't think you look at these points and consider them, really.
Well, you haven't read my other work, or for example, I gave a...
Who's gonna read your work? Respectfully, Connor, ain't no one wasting their time reading your work, mate.
Speech at the Family Education Trust after you, but you weren't there, and I did actually cover those sorts of points. So I don't disagree. The reason I think it's farcical to say I am on the left is because I do not buy into the anthropology that liberalism shares with the same Marxists that have populated teaching unions and are, out there marching.
I don't mean the liberals. I mean the leftist identitarians. That's who you
they're
have
the
lots in
same.
common
They're
with.
the same group.
No, they're not.
No, hang on, because the fundamental premise of liberals and Marxists is that they all start from the original position of we are all the same.
Okay, so the anthropology is complete misuse of that term, but anyway, we'll carry on.
I didn't mean that authority is wrong. I'm a big believer in hierarchy. I mean, it would be a bit weird if, as a Catholic, I wasn't. What I was saying was...
So he just said he's a Catholic, which is incredibly ironic, okay? Because England is not a Catholic nation. It's a Protestant nation, okay? It's a Protestant nation. It's not a Catholic nation. And he made the argument earlier about the fact that, religion essentially causes a split in one's commitment, so to speak, a split in one's allegiance, limits the ability for someone to be fully patriotic. And he used the hijab as his argument as to why someone who wears a hijab can never be fully accepted, because they have an allegiance to their religion. And then he comes out here and he's not even Church of England. Yeah, Church of England. He's a Catholic, which the Church of England historically tried to remove, or successfully removed and replaced with their own church. So he's got effectively a foreign religion. He's practicing a foreign religion, which contradicts his own point.
You had a lengthy lawsuit for which, again, you had my sympathies, and you were on the right side of that, don't get me wrong, because Muslim students organically started praying in the playground. And so rather than saying Islam isn't welcome in our school, he said all religions aren't welcome in our school. Now, when Kimmy Badenoch says this is the muscular liberalism I would like to base the country on, no. We're a country... I don't
know about what Kimmy says. I wouldn't call us a muscular liberalism. I'd call us that we're British, which is a very different thing from liberalism.
So she just essentially is bowing down to the pressure. She's like a Kemi Badenoch, bowing down to this pressure. She says no religions, but really it's more the overt practicing of religion that they have a problem with, and normally Islamic. Because I'm sure if a group of Catholics held hands and prayed in the canteen together, we wouldn't have seen her make any kind of reaction or act out against any kind of religion. So this is just kind of like, seriously, man, boring.
But Britain. Sorry, Dan, I don't want to interrupt.
If you were to adopt a child, you and your wife were to adopt a baby from Nigeria, let's say.
And this is what ground my gears at the start. Once again, the picking of Nigeria, the picking of a black child. This is her. You could have made this point equally as effectively, even more effectively, if you just said a child who looked like me, who was Indian. Yeah, she didn't say that. She deliberately picked a black child because she doesn't want to. She wants to make it like I said, they like to fabricate this false white versus black divide in the UK, which has never been an issue. And by the way, when I say they, I mean people like her. I think it was Suella Braverman, who was trying to use people deported back to Rwanda. The UK has never had a problem with Rwandan migrants ever, like never, apart from after Suella Braverman's little thing, and then suddenly you had this random attack of a Rwandan boy who attacked these three girls, which I think was a total false flag. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it's nonsense, because you just never hear of Rwandans causing trouble in the UK ever. This is the kind of shit that you have to put up with in this country. Do you know what I mean? So it's people like her. Yeah, she's pissing me off. I don't like her.
And you were to bring up the baby in your household and send your child to a school that was patriotic and did teach all the sorts of things that we do at Michaela. And you and your wife were to be the way you are with your child. And
also, by the way, all those Asian people that I mentioned before, and Kemi Badenoch, they're all with white partners as well. So this is a part of her national strategy, so to speak, to marry into whiteness. You know, it's kind of like seen as the very epitome of Asian culture, to marry into whiteness, and to produce these kind of like, oh, what you got? We're basically white. You know, if we had a child, the child would be white. You know, that's kind of where that's why she's positioned this very specifically with a Nigerian child and not with an Asian child.
And talk about the history of the country, the culture of the country. You would eat, I don't know, breakfast with baked beans, and you would watch Mr. Bean, and you would read Wordsworth and Shakespeare, and you would go for drives in the rolling hills, and there would be a love for England in your household. Are you telling me that child would not be brought up as a British child? Is that what you were saying?
No, they would be brought up as a British child,
and they would not be British.
Is that what
you're saying?
They would possess a British passport. They would be administratively British, but that does not mean that they are indistinguishable from people who have English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish heritage, which is what Robert Toombs had said.
So hang on.
So this is the issue here, and you get a lot of this deliberate straw manning, because you notice how he brought up English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish ancestry, Northern Irish, obviously. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that one. But the point being that he brought that up because what he didn't want to deal with is the term British, because everyone agrees that Britain is an empire. And everyone agrees that in that scenario that she's just painted, that child would qualify to be British, just like I qualify to be British with my British passport. I was born here as a Brit, but I would never call myself an Englishman. Okay, I would never call myself a Scotsman. I would never call myself Welsh, because I think everyone with half a brain is able to identify the difference between ethnic groups is what English is. If you say you're English, you are identifying with an ethnic group, an ethnicity. I am English, I am Scottish, I am Irish, I am Welsh. Those are ethnicities. Yet British is not an ethnicity. Yeah, Britain is an empire. Britain is a false nation state conquering label, imperialist colony, whatever you want to call it. But it's like the Roman Empire. People would call themselves Roman. Okay, you didn't have to be from Rome to be Roman. Roman was something that people could, qualify, could be born into, could be annexed into, and they would become Romans. Okay, it wouldn't suddenly make them Italian, for want of a better word. So this is where he's deliberately, well, actually probably not deliberately. I just don't think Connor's too bright, so he probably misses that. So maybe if he watches this in the future, Connor, I hope that explains the difference, between someone who is British, okay, British born, or someone who becomes British, a black Brit like myself, versus an English, or I've never in history called myself, oh, I'm English. I speak English, but I've never called myself English, because I understand that I'm not, neither do I want to be a part of that ethnic group.
Hang on, no.
That child, because that child is black, would not be.
No, it's because that child is Nigerian. It's not because they're black.
But it's your child. You've brought up that child.
Yes, but that doesn't mean they suddenly.
And by the way, it's absolutely because they're black. What she should have done, if she had any iota of common sense, she should have asked him that exact same scenario, but said it was a Polish child. Imagine if you adopted a Polish child who was white. And I mean, he looks like he could have some Polish ancestry, and for all intents and purposes, presented the same as an English person. You raised him as an English person with your surname. Everything about him was English. He spoke with a strong English accent, this, that, and the other. But the only people who knew about his Polish ancestry was you. Would you raise him and would you accept him as an English child? That would have been a better question. But she was too much, you know, in her black versus white bag to be able to pull out a good analogy. Silly woman.
Become English.
Well, okay, so what is it that would be so different about that child? Let's say you
Because
have a biological child and then you have another child and you bring up both of them.
Because one has my heritage.
And that makes what difference in terms of the way in which the child behaves?
It doesn't make a difference in how they're treated. Allow me to explain. Just because you have a different heritage doesn't mean that we should treat one another with more or less moral consideration. Just like I'm not impolite to you, never have been, on or off camera.
No, I'm saying how they behave. How would they be any different?
Oh, one is more likely to have a frame of reference for the heroes that they are being taught to revere than another, because the other one, by dint of having different heritage, has an additional obstacle to overcome to consider themselves a part of our national family or even my own family.
It's your child.
Yes.
So I don't understand.
Okay. But the other point that I was making was that when...
Okay, I'm exhausted. Okay, I'm going to move on from this video now, guys. I hope you found that entertaining or somewhat interesting, and it gave you a glimpse into the political spectrum and the kind of characters that we deal with in the UK. I hope you can see how tiring it is. Yeah, for me as a black person who really shouldn't have even been a part of this conversation. They could have had this conversation, but they will pull us into it irrespective. And this is typical of UK media, typical of people in political positions of, you know, policy making. This is what they do. They continuously pull, particularly Asians, continuously pull black people into a conversation where we don't need to be and we don't belong. And you have people like him who just think on the basis of them being English that they don't have to understand anything. They can just talk about stuff that they have zero insight about. This is like very, very typical of what you get in the UK. But anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I'm going to move on now because they're grinding my gears and